Donald Trump panics as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calmly exposes his shocking record on black communities, live on national TV. But what she reveals next leaves the entire country stunned. Stay until the end to discover the one piece of evidence that could change U.S. history forever. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment to let us know. Do you think Trump should be held accountable? It didn't begin with shouting. There was no finger-pointing, no slamming of fists or viral tantrums. Just a question, so calm, so measured, so disarmingly precise, that it carved through the thick air of political spectacle like a scalpel. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat with a stillness that defied the chaos around her. And when she leaned into her mic on that nationally televised oversight hearing, tilted her head slightly and asked, "Mr. Trump, can you explain why every single policy initiative you pushed disproportionately harmed black communities?" A hush fell like a curtain. Donald J. Trump blinked. Twice. The smirk he'd worn like a crown for hours twitched. For a man who once relished the theater of confrontation, whose bravado fed on the oxygen of cameras and conflict, this moment was different. You could almost hear the calculus behind his eyes. Decades of headlines, controversies, tweets, soundbites, colliding against the cold precision of a new, unflinching voice. And in that stillness, in that long second of silence before he answered, the country leaned forward. Because this wasn't just another partisan clash. It was a reckoning, a live, unscripted reckoning being conducted under the blinding lights of justice, history, and broadcast syndication. 4 months, the Congressional Oversight Committee had been pursuing an investigation into the systemic consequences of the Trump administration's federal policies, from housing and education to criminal justice reform and healthcare access. While some observers dismissed the hearings as political theater, what they missed was the slow-building groundwork laid by a handful of lawmakers who had lived the very consequences being examined. Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to posture. She was there to prosecute. With facts, with lived reality, and with a voice that resonated far beyond Capitol Hill. I was in the room that day, not as a lawmaker or aide, but as a journalist who had covered Trump's rise, reign, and residue for nearly a decade. I'd sat in rallies where Confederate flags flapped beside campaign banners. I'd walked through neighborhoods in Flint, Newark, and Baton Rouge where federal funding had vanished like vapor under his rule. And I'd spoken to mothers whose sons were incarcerated longer for petty crimes while white-collar criminals from Mar-a-Lago strutted through courtrooms untouched. But nothing I'd seen prepared me for the controlled fire Jasmine brought into that chamber. She didn't accuse, she unveiled. Layer by layer. Let's talk about the 2018 HUD rule change that removed anti-discrimination protections from housing vouchers, she continued. You justified it as regulatory rollback. But in Chicago, that change led to the eviction of over 6,000 black families in under 2 years. Do you deny that outcome? Trump shifted. I had nothing to do with that, he muttered, his voice rising with a kind of defensive tremor that says more than denial ever could. Crockett remained composed. Sir, the signature on the executive memo is yours. Are you suggesting someone forged it? Gasps rippled. Not from the gallery, not from the press, from the members themselves. He looked trapped. And for the first time in a long time, he knew it. The hearing wasn't supposed to be this moment. It had been billed as a routine oversight review, standard procedure, even in this polarized environment. But what unfolded on live television was something else entirely. A dissection of policy as prejudice. A trial of intent masquerading as administration. Crockett had spent the week prior combing through federal memos, audit reports, and sworn affidavits. Her team, a mix of young black policy researchers and veteran civil rights attorneys, had constructed a timeline that didn't just link Trump's policies to racial harm, but framed them as part of a disturbing through line. A pattern: the cancellation of DACA advance applications in predominantly Latinx districts, the redirecting of HBCU support funds to faith-based institutions with overwhelmingly white student bodies, the Department of Justice's rollback of consent decrees on police departments accused of brutality. None of it was isolated. It was cumulative. And now it had a narrator with the credentials, charisma, and constitutional power to say it plainly. By the second hour of the hearing, Crockett wasn't just exposing Trump's policies. She was exposing the silent machinery behind them. Would you like to address the DOJ's data on prosecutorial disparities under your leadership? She asked, scrolling through her iPad as though reading from a grocery list. During your term, Black defendants were 38% more likely to receive maximum sentencing recommendations compared to white defendants for identical charges. I've got the numbers right here. Are they wrong? Or were you just uninterested? He didn't answer. And in that void, vacant and vulnerable, a new truth began to take root. Not because Crockett had shouted, but because she didn't need to. Across the country, something shifted. The clip, of course, went viral, but not in the usual meme-ified way. It was studied, replayed, broken down like a courtroom cross-examination. In law schools, professors replayed it in lectures. On cable news, analysts found themselves speechless. Even some former Trump aides, under anonymity, admitted they had never seen him so clearly caught off guard. But this wasn't about a gaffe or a viral gotcha. It was about a system being laid bare by a black woman from Texas who'd grown up hearing the names of policies and presidents that destroyed the futures of kids like her brothers, who became a lawyer not to chase power, but to protect people, who ran for office because she was tired of watching men like Donald Trump smirk their way through accountability. And here she was, delivering a new kind of justice, not through vengeance, but through exposure. You talk about loving black people, she said toward the end, her voice soft but laced with steel. But loving us isn't about quoting Kanye West or waving your hand at a few rappers on stage. It's about policy. It's about the choices you made when no one was watching. Then she said it. History may not put you in jail, Mr. Trump, but it will indict your soul. That's when he stood. No announcement. No protest. He stood, looked at the chair, then at her, and muttered, "I don't have to listen to this." And with that, Donald J. Trump walked out of a congressional hearing, live on television. A president, cornered not by grandstanding, but by truth. The room didn't erupt. There were no cheers, only a silence so dense you could hear Crockett's papers shuffle as she calmly stacked them and leaned back. Outside, cable trucks buzzed and cameras rolled. And across the country, in barbershops, break rooms, and bus stations, Americans watched a man unmasked and a woman ascend. But that was just the beginning, because within 48 hours, the fallout would expand into something even Trump's lawyers hadn't anticipated. Subpoenas, leaks, and a buried 2017 document that connected his administration's early urban renewal policies to a real estate shell company based in, of all places, Palm Beach. The same company that once sold a condemned building to a donor linked to a hate group. And suddenly, what started as a question in a hearing room became something much more explosive. The document surfaced at 3:47 a.m., buried in a Dropbox folder attached to a whistleblower affidavit quietly filed in D.C. District Court. I remember the timestamp because I was still awake, sifting through old emails about HUD deregulation when my encrypted Signal app buzzed. The message came from a source I hadn't heard from in over a year. A former junior staffer in the Department of Housing and Urban Development who had vanished into academic obscurity after leaving the Trump administration in 2019. All the message said was, "You'll want to see this. It connects everything." What I opened wasn't flashy. No big red letters, no watermark of confidential across the top. Just a plain 6-page internal memorandum dated May 5, 2017 marked Strategic Opportunity Zones, Urban Redevelopment Portfolio, The language was bureaucratic, thick with policy jargon. But in between the lines was something damning. Something Jasmine Crockett had only hinted at in the hearing, but now had proof of. At the center of the memo was a company, Redwood National LLC, described innocuously as a development advisory partner. It had been contracted through a back-channel HUD initiative to streamline acquisition of distressed urban parcels for public-private revitalization. That phrase might have gone unnoticed by the average reader. But I'd seen it before. It was legal camouflage. A euphemism used in the real estate world to refer to the buying up of low-income, often black-majority neighborhoods for pennies, then redeveloping them into high-cost mixed-use zones that price out original residents. Gentrification, mechanized and federally sanctioned. The kicker? Redwood National LLC was registered to a post office box in West Palm Beach, and the listed contact on the corporate filing, David Elbridge Langston, was not only a former campaign donor to Trump's 2016 run, but had been photographed attending a private fundraiser in Mar-a-Lago just 3 weeks before the memo's date. By noon, I had cross-referenced property tax filings from Detroit, Cleveland, and St. Louis, 3 cities where Trump had publicly promised revitalization investments in his first year. Every single one had parcels transferred through shell corporations to Redwood National affiliates. Entire blocks sold for less than $20,000, then flipped to developers for triple the value within 6 months. And here's where it burned. Each of those properties had previously housed low-income, largely black tenants. People who were pushed out with no relocation plan, no guaranteed return, and no public notification. Their homes had been reclassified as uninhabitable through strategic code enforcement, making them eligible for fast-track sale. It was urban cleansing in a suit and tie. By the time the media started circling the story, Jasmine Crockett was already 2 steps ahead. Her office issued a statement that afternoon. We will be submitting formal requests for investigative hearings into Redwood National LLC and its connection to federal displacement policy under the prior administration. The black communities of this country are not pawns on a spreadsheet. They deserve accountability. The backlash came fast. Conservative media called it a smear campaign, claiming Redwood was simply engaged in standard revitalization. Trump himself took to Truth Social in a flurry of capital letters. Total hoax. Democrat witch hunt. I have done more for black people than anyone, but the post didn't include a single reference to the document. Not a denial. Not even an explanation. Because even Trump knew, once Crockett had the paper trail, it wasn't political anymore. It was prosecutorial. I flew to Houston that weekend to speak to her team. What I found in that unassuming district office, wedged between a payday loan center and a corner taco shop, wasn't a war room. It was a command center for justice. Crockett staffers, many barely out of law school, had transformed the space into a hive of legal cross-referencing. Walls covered in timeline charts, photos of affected neighborhoods, scanned eviction notices, policy printouts with red string connecting them like a crime board. This is bigger than Trump, her chief of staff told me as we pored over a redacted version of an internal HUD presentation. He's the face, yes, but the machinery goes deeper. This was a strategy. The word sent a chill through me, because strategy implies intent. And when intent intersects with harm, you no longer have policy failure. You have state-sanctioned injustice. The hearings resumed the following week, and Crockett came back sharper, more methodical. She presented the document, highlighted, cited, and entered into the congressional record. She read testimonies from former tenants in Ohio and Missouri, elderly black women who lost their homes without notice, single mothers who watched their buildings condemned without repair, Vietnam veterans who died before they could relocate. And when she looked Trump in the eyes again, she didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "You said you wanted to make America great again. Was this your blueprint? Trump's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. You could feel it, not just in the room, but across the public square. The narrative was shifting. This wasn't about partisanship anymore. It was about truth laid bare. Polls began to move, not dramatically, but noticeably. Among independents, approval of the hearings jumped 14%. Black voter registration campaigns began citing Crockett's questioning in their literature. Civil rights groups filed joint amicus briefs calling for federal investigation into displacement-era policies. And then came the leak. A voicemail, 46 seconds, leaked to The Intercept, verified by metadata, voice recognition, and timestamped 6 weeks after the 2017 HUD memo. Trump's voice speaking to an unknown aide. If those blocks don't get cleared out, we'll lose the redevelopment deal. And we need it done quietly. No marches, no press. These people don't know how to build value. They just destroy it. The phrase, "these people," reverberated like an indictment across every screen in the nation. It was the moment Crockett had waited for. Not for vengeance, but for clarity. For the country to see the unfiltered truth beneath the MAGA slogans. Not economic nationalism, not populism, but prejudice wrapped in policy, sealed with a golden signature. The next morning, Crockett walked into the Capitol holding a single sheet of paper. The whistleblower's sworn testimony confirming the voice was Trump's. She said nothing to the press, just handed the document to the committee clerk and took her seat. As she placed her hands on the table, her expression unreadable, the room knew. The mask had slipped. The proof was real. The pattern was intentional. And the question now wasn't just, what did Trump do? But how many knew and stayed silent? The House Oversight Chamber had grown quieter over the days. Not because the press lost interest, quite the opposite, but because silence was now synonymous with dread. You could feel it in the tap of the stenographer's fingers, in the stifled coughs of aides, in the way certain members of Congress, once bold defenders of Donald Trump, now avoided eye contact with Jasmine Crockett entirely. Because the truth was no longer theoretical. Crockett had turned over the affidavit. The voice had been verified. The whistleblower had come forward, prepared to testify under oath. And now the Republicans on the panel weren't just contending with optics. They were staring down potential legal exposure. What unnerved them most wasn't Crockett's tone. It was her precision. She didn't grandstand, didn't gloat. She asked questions that built like scaffolding. Questions that forced them to choose between defending a former president or defending their own reputations. "Congressman Ellison," she said on the record, turning to a Republican from Florida who had previously chaired a subcommittee on housing reform. "Were you aware of the Redwood Initiative during your tenure?" He blinked. "I was aware of a variety of public-private partnerships." "Sir, yes or no? Did you sign off on the memo titled Strategic Opportunity Zones?" A pause. "I believe I may have seen that memo in a briefing." "Congressman," she said, holding up the page, her voice cool, "your initials are on the bottom of page 2, next to the line. Approved for expedited transfer, pending OMB sign-off. Did you review the policy implications before approving?" He stammered. I don't recall the specific details at this moment. Would you like me to read you the details?" And that was it. The room inhaled. Because Crockett wasn't just exposing Trump anymore. She was unspooling the complicity. The story had outgrown the man. Now, it was about everyone who looked the other way as black families were pushed out of their homes, their neighborhoods sold, their futures stripped to create high-rise condos and Whole Foods parking lots in cities where corner stores once stitched the community together. I was back in D.C. when the whistleblower, Marissa Dean, gave her closed-door testimony. A former policy analyst who had worked in the HUD redevelopment office, she had compiled a spreadsheet in 2018 tracking displacement outcomes across 13 U.S. cities. She presented it during a meeting with senior officials, warning that the rate of African American eviction and homelessness is not incidental. It's a feature of the program as currently designed. Her report was never published. Instead, she was transferred. Twice, eventually pushed out. Her voice shook as she recounted it, but she never looked away from the committee. "I stayed quiet because I thought someone else would say something," she said. But no one ever did. Not until Congresswoman Crockett. In an age of performative outrage, this was something else. Something slower, heavier, more dangerous to those who'd built careers off the myth that systemic racism was a talking point, rather than a lived architecture. And Crockett, through meticulous research and unflinching poise, was turning that architecture into evidence. The backlash turned venomous. MAGA influencers flooded Twitter and Telegram with deepfakes and racialized attacks. Fox News ran a cheer-in that read Crockett's communist coup, barely masking the panic behind the insult. But Crockett didn't flinch. She issued no response. Instead, she flew to St. Louis. Not for a rally or a press conference. For a funeral. Miss Harriet Blevins, age 91, one of the tenants forced out in the first wave of the Redwood Initiative. Her family reached out after seeing the hearings. They said she died clutching a photograph of the row house she'd lived in for 46 years, demolished in 2019 without warning. Crockett sat in the back pew. No cameras, no speech. Just presence. Afterward, she spoke quietly to Harriet's granddaughter, who had driven from Kentucky just to thank her. She used to say, "They don't see us, but I think she saw you." That moment, to me, was the entire story, because beyond the hearings, the documents, the legal jargon, this was about the cost of being unseen, of a government that claimed to build prosperity while raising the lives of those least able to fight back. The next week, a coalition of civil rights lawyers submitted a class action suit against Redwood National LLC. The suit cited the HUD memo, the whistleblower's testimony, and Trump's leaked voicemail. It was the first such case to name a former president as a material witness in a racial displacement scheme. And still, Crockett didn't spike the football. She issued a statement that said only, "Let the facts speak. Let justice follow." But inside Congress, the temperature changed. Whispers of potential criminal referrals began to float. Senior Democrats debated whether the Oversight Committee could refer Trump for federal indictment. Not over January 6th, not over documents or taxes, but over a calculated campaign of racial economic sabotage. And Trump? He vanished. For days, no rallies, no rants. Just silence. Then, on a Thursday night, a CNN anchor interrupted programming to announce that Trump's legal team had issued a cease and desist letter to Crockett, accusing her of defamation and false and malicious insinuation. The country braced. Crockett's response? She walked into the next day's hearing wearing a black blazer and a gold pin that read simply, "We have receipts." And she did. Her team released a 220-page dossier compiling every known instance of HUD-linked displacement under Trump. It included interviews, memos, photos, eviction orders, and IRS filings of the shell companies involved. It traced money. It named names. It was, in short, a blueprint for indictment. That night, a segment aired on 60 Minutes featuring 3 families evicted during the Redwood expansion. One mother described watching her daughter cry over the loss of her bedroom. Another, a retired teacher, recounted living out of a storage unit for 8 months. But the most chilling interview came from a man named Curtis Melvin, a former Redwood contractor who confessed on camera. "They told us to avoid certain areas if the media was nearby. Said don't engage with the locals, just get the job done. I didn't know who was signing the checks at first. But once I found out, I couldn't sleep right." By now, the story had leapt from hearings to headlines. What began as a question in a chamber was now the lead in every newspaper. And Crockett, with no theatrics and no army of consultants, had pulled it off through the quiet weapon of truth. But she knew it wasn't over, because the next witness scheduled to testify wasn't a staffer, wasn't a whistleblower. It was Donald Trump himself, and the subpoena had already been served. The date was set, October 12th. The headlines called it Judgment Day. But for Jasmine Crockett, it was just Thursday. Outside the Rayburn House office building, the scene was as chaotic as one might expect. Protesters on both sides lined the barricades, their chants clashing like cymbals in the crisp fall air. Networks erected satellite vans by 6 a.m., and by 9, X, was nothing but hashtag Crockett versus Trump. But inside the building, beyond the shouting and spectacle, was a room quieted by gravity. Everyone knew this wasn't just oversight. This was historical confrontation. Donald Trump arrived just past 10 a.m., flanked by a legal team that looked more like bodyguards than attorneys. His tie was red, his jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the room not with curiosity, but calculation. He didn't acknowledge anyone, not the chairman, not the clerks, and certainly not the woman seated across from him. Jasmine Crockett, in a simple navy suit and a folder thick with documents, didn't flinch. She just waited, and when the chair recognized her, the room exhaled. "Mr. Trump," she began, no trace of performative bravado. "We appreciate your willingness to appear. I understand that your counsel may advise you to limit certain answers. But for the record, I must inform you, this is not a court of law. This is a seat of government accountability." Trump shifted in his chair. Crockett opened the file. The sound of the class popping echoed across the chamber like a starter pistol. "Let's begin with Redwood National LLC." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up with a now infamous HUD memo. Strategic Opportunity Zones, Urban Redevelopment Portfolio. In the corner, the date, May 5th, 2017. "Your initials don't appear on this document," she said. "But 6 days after this memo was approved, your personal schedule places you at Mar-a-Lago with David Elbridge Langston, the registered founder of Redwood National. Do you deny meeting him?" Trump leaned toward the microphone. "I meet lots of people. That doesn't mean I know what they're doing with their companies." "Understood," she replied. "But do you deny discussing housing redevelopment strategies with Mr. Langston during that visit?" He blinked. "I don't recall that conversation." She nodded once. No drama, no smirk. Just the slow tightening of a noose built from facts. Crockett turned the page. "We have a voicemail authenticated and timestamped, in which your voice says, and I quote, 'These people don't know how to build value. They just destroy it.'" Gasps. Shuffling. Trump's lead counsel rose. "Objection. That voicemail was obtained." "This is not a trial," the chair interjected. "The Congresswoman may continue." Crockett didn't look up. "You've since claimed the clip is fake. But 5 separate forensic analysts confirmed the audio's authenticity." "Mr. Trump, who are these people?" A long pause. Trump stared at her. And for the first time that morning, he responded with unfiltered honesty. "I meant people who waste opportunities. Doesn't matter what race." Crockett looked up. "Just once. Just long enough. Then why did 94% of Redwood's acquisitions under your administration occur in black-majority neighborhoods?" Trump blinked. "Coincidence." Crockett raised her eyebrow slightly. "Statistical modeling run by Stanford University suggests the probability of that coincidence is less than 0.0001%. Do you still want to claim it was random?" The silence thickened. "I'm not a mathematician," Trump mumbled. "No," Crockett replied, voice steady. "But you were president of the United States. You were responsible for people's homes, livelihoods, and dignity. And today, the nation deserves to know whether your policies were incompetently racist or deliberately so." It was a sentence heard around the world. Not shouted, not tweeted, spoken. A calm, surgical indictment broadcast live to millions. I remember watching from the press booth, heart thudding not from spectacle, but from something rarer. Truth revealed in real time. You could feel the tectonic shift happening beneath the floorboards of the institution. This wasn't just about Donald Trump anymore. It was about everything his name had come to represent, and everything Jasmine Crockett's presence was now rewriting. As the hearing continued, she laid out a sequence of evidence that would have made any prosecutor proud. Property flips, tax evasion strategies, records of closed-door meetings between HUD and private equity firms, and a curious deletion of 17 emails from the Federal Redevelopment Archive just days after the first eviction wave began in Baltimore. One by one, Trump tried to dodge, deflect, or diminish, but Crockett didn't pursue him like an adversary. She dissected him like a pattern. Mr. Trump, you say you care about black communities, but every action you authorized, from criminal justice rollbacks to the dismantling of civil rights divisions, says otherwise. Do you understand why people feel betrayed? Trump snorted. I've done more for black people than any president in history. Crockett didn't smile. She didn't scoff. She simply held up a photo. A boarded-up building in Cleveland with "We lived here" spray-painted in red. Then why does it look like this? Trump didn't answer. The next hour was brutal. Not because Crockett raised her voice, but because she didn't. Her restraint became the weapon. Her silence after each question was deafening. Even when Trump blustered or attempted to pivot, the facts hung in the air like a noose only he could see tightening. When the session ended, Trump didn't wait for adjournment. He stood, murmured to his counsel, and left the chamber. This time, there were no cameras chasing him down the corridor. No supporters waving signs. Just quiet. A kind of national exhale. Outside, reporters buzzed like hornets. Inside, Jasmine Crockett stood, collected her papers, and said one thing to the committee. Accountability is not vengeance. It's vision. And I hope this hearing was a glimpse of what that future looks like. But the real shock came the next morning. A sealed indictment. Federal court. Filed at 8:12 a.m. United States versus Redwood National LLC et al. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Civil rights violations. Racketeering. And listed among the unindicted co-conspirators, Donald J. Trump. The walls were closing in. The indictment itself didn't mention Trump by name in the formal list of defendants, but his fingerprints were everywhere, from the early emails linking HUD consultants to Redwood National LLC, to the testimonies of displaced families whose homes vanished under federally accelerated revitalization projects, to the voicemail, authenticated beyond dispute, where Trump's voice belittled an entire race under the guise of economic development. And then came the line that no administration, current or former, wants to see in writing. We find reasonable cause to believe that these policies were not incidental consequences, but the calculated result of strategic decisions made at the highest levels of executive leadership. Legal analysts flooded every news outlet. Former federal prosecutors debated the use of RICO statutes in a housing policy context. But across social media, among black communities, the story had already surpassed the legal implications. It had become emotional, spiritual, cultural, a reckoning long overdue, because Jasmine Crockett had not merely challenged a president. She had given voice to generations who had suffered in silence while their neighborhoods were weaponized against them, their dignity buried beneath asphalt and gentrified coffee shops. She had taken the old tools of power, paperwork, process, patience, and wielded them with the grace of someone who knew exactly what she was fighting for. Still, Crockett never made it about her. Even as news crews camped outside her office and headlines praised her as the congresswoman who cornered Trump, she kept a tight schedule, appearing not on late-night comedy panels or podcasts, but in town halls, in Ferguson, in Baton Rouge, in the south side of Chicago, listening, taking notes, explaining the legal process like a teacher, not a celebrity. "We're not done," she said again and again. "This isn't about one man. It's about a system, and systems take time to dismantle." Inside the Capitol, the fear among certain lawmakers became tangible. Staffers whispered of upcoming resignations. One congressman from Georgia, who had signed off on 3 Redwood parcel transfers, quietly announced he would not seek re-election. 2 senior officials from Trump's former HUD division were subpoenaed. A private security firm connected to the property seizures shut down overnight. And as for Trump, he returned to Florida. His rallies grew smaller, more erratic. His posts on Truth Social became increasingly unhinged, oscillating between calling Jasmine Crockett a Marxist puppet and accusing the DOJ of witch hunt racism. But the old energy was gone. The bravado seemed hollow. Even his most fervent allies found themselves dodging questions about the Redwood scandal. Behind the scenes, Crockett's office continued its forensic approach. A second wave of documents revealed that not only had Redwood National benefited from exclusive federal tax breaks designed during the Trump administration, but those breaks were embedded in a clause tucked inside the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, crafted by a lobbyist with direct ties to Jared Kushner. The circle was tightening. Then came the most symbolic blow of all. In a unanimous vote, the House Oversight Committee referred the Redwood case and its findings, including Trump's involvement, to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division for formal criminal review. No grand speeches, no media circus, just signatures. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't attend the press briefing. Instead, she was in Detroit, walking with residents of a recently reclaimed neighborhood, helping them navigate the new legal path to recovering property stolen under the Redwood scheme. She said nothing to the cameras that followed, but one local journalist caught her final words to a mother who had just learned she might be able to move back into the house her family had lost 5 years earlier. "You deserve more than this," Crockett said, clasping the woman's hand. "But at least now, they'll have to answer for what they took." That moment, quiet, unrehearsed, and full of the grit that justice demands, became the image that outlasted the hearing rooms and court filings. A black congresswoman standing on a cracked sidewalk beside a mother who had survived every system designed to fail her. And behind them, the outline of a home. Not a building, a home. The very thing Trump had underestimated when he saw communities as statistics. The very thing he couldn't destroy with policy or prejudice. Because what Jasmine Crockett revealed wasn't just his hatred. It was the enduring love, defiance, and truth of a people who had been waiting far too long for someone to finally say what needed to be said. On the record, in public, and without fear. We are not collateral damage. We are the point. And from that moment on, the national conversation was changed forever. Not by a viral moment, by a calm question, a firm voice, and a name that history will not forget.